John Thune from South Dakota was elected as the leader of the Republican majority in the Senate. Latin Americans have very little knowledge on John Thune because, in general, Latin Americans are unfamiliar with South Dakota. We tend to concentrate on states such as Florida, Texas, New York, California, where Hispanic population is significant. However, a great strength of the United States Republican system is the territorial representation provided by both the Senate and the Electoral College. In Venezuela, unfortunately, the 1999 Constitution imposed by previous dictator Hugo Chavez got rid of the Senate. So we only now have a Chamber of Representatives, and small states in size with sizable population take all the votes in Congress, while big states, unpopulated, with significant natural resources, are usually not taken into account. So, if a senator from South Dakota has become the leader of the Senate, congratulations, and hopefully the Hispanic community will have an opportunity to get to know him better. In particular, the Venezuelan community would appreciate John Thune to learn about previous dealings and recommendations by Florida Senator Rick Scott, who has been asking for increasing the bounty for capturing Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello from $15 million to $100 million each. Venezuelans are not asking the US military to engage into war in our country. Of course, Venezuelans, we want our country to regain freedom. However, we need United States help. We really do. We voted on democratic elections on July 28th, and the opposition candidate Edmundo González Urrutia won by a 67% landslide. If we had the electoral college system, every single state would have been called for President Edmundo. However, Nicolás Maduro refuses to give up power. His term expires on January 10th, and he must be removed from power by that time. The Venezuelan military is not cooperating because it's extremely corrupt. The Venezuelan military, along with Maduro, Cabello, and other members of the Sun cartel, are responsible for smuggling a sizable part of drugs and illegal immigrants into the United States. Therefore, if Donald Trump wishes to succeed in his domestic goal of getting rid of the violence produced by cartels, the violence produced by criminals who are coming into the country through illegal immigration, and if Donald Trump wants to reduce the flooding of illegal drugs, including cocaine and fentanyl, Donald Trump must make an explicit effort to overthrow Maduro, which is a goal he was unable to complete during his first term. Joe Biden's policy towards Venezuela has been a disaster. He released Alex Saab, who was a prisoner who evaded United States sanctions in complicity with Iran and other enemies of the Americas. He was in jail in the United States, and Joe Biden just released him into Venezuela with nothing in exchange. And now Alex Saab is a minister of economic development here, protected by the dictatorship, and he is currently trying to sell Monomeros fertilizer company in Barranquilla, Colombia, which is the property of PDVSA, just as Citgo. As you know, Citgo is an important refinery in the United States owned by the Venezuelan Petroleum Company, and terrible mismanagement by the Venezuelan government as they used to extract profits from the company into political propaganda within the communist regime has made Citgo collapse and is currently auctioned to its creditors as it has incurred in lots of debt. Venezuelan government has been a disaster and a producer of humanitarian crisis all over the American continent because it behaves as a drug cartel. Their only reason for existence is remaining in power, and they will arm themselves to the teeth so that they are not overthrown. We Venezuelans have a new president-elect, Edmundo González Urrutia, who is currently in Brussels and who spoke as president of Venezuela yesterday at the European Parliament and is recognized as our legitimate president. He is expected to arrive into the United States soon, and hopefully he will be able to speak to the Senate, to the Chamber of Representatives, and to President-elect Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, so that we all together define what will be our priorities for ensuring he gets into power. So a United States military intervention in Venezuela would not be to overthrow the current regime. The current regime is lawful until January 10th, but starting on January 11th, about the same time that Donald Trump will become president of the United States, Edmundo will be a real president, and since he may be captured and imprisoned if he comes into Venezuela, at that time, it will probably be feasible that Edmundo González Urrutia assumes the presidential office at a Venezuelan embassy or airplane or ship with Venezuelan flag. So it could be very possible that the Venezuelan Supreme Court in exile gets into the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., and Edmundo González Urrutia becomes the president of the Republic of Venezuela on January 10th at the Venezuelan embassy located at Washington District of Columbia. We would expect Marco Rubio to collaborate in the ceremonies leading to Edmundo González Urrutia's formal first day of presidency of Venezuela, which will probably have to happen in Washington, D.C., as it is impossible to happen in Caracas until Maduro and Cabello are overthrown. They lost elections, but they refused to leave. It is important to remember that Donald Trump also thought in 2020 that his election was stolen. However, proof was scant, and Joe Biden won such elections in several states. The case of Edmundo and Maduro is different. Edmundo won everywhere, and the Organization of American States, also located in Washington, D.C., has copies of all voting records as certified by the Jimmy Carter Center for Elections and Democracy, which is a responsible electoral observer worldwide. There is absolutely no doubt anywhere in the world that Edmundo González Urrutia won the Venezuelan elections. The only problem is that Maduro wishes not to leave. As you know, Fidel Castro and Raúl Castro and now Díaz-Canel are horrible dictators of Cuba. They have been almost a century in power, and United States' most noticeable failure in foreign policy has been not to ever be able to overthrow the Cuban regime. It should be noted that the Democratic Party, which used to be a reputable civil rights party in the not so distant past, has now become an ultra left wing communist propaganda machine directly influenced by drug cartels that promote drug consumption, financed by the dictatorial regimes of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. Even though the United States does not want foreign wars overseas, within the American community, which includes North America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, the Western Hemisphere, it is important that the United States takes as a domestic policy involving national security, the cleanup of drug cartels, and the restoration of democratic governments in the whole continent, because the citizens of countries that are led by dictatorships are just as democratic as US citizens, but we have no power to defend ourselves. We can't use firearms. The monopoly of weapons is completely in the hands of the terrorist dictatorial states, and they act in tandem. Dictatorships in Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Bolivia are supported by terrorist organizations from Iran, all with Chinese financing, which, as China wishes to replace the United States as the single most important financer of Latin America, and Russia, which politically, of course, wishes to be antagonistic to the United States everywhere in the world. So if Donald Trump's policy for the Americas is isolationist, it should be isolationist within the context of the hemisphere. It is a mistake to consider Latin America completely foreign. It is our domestic continent. It might be wise to be more isolationist in Eurasia, Africa, and Oceania, and if they wish to fight wars, it's their wars. But here in the Americas, we are almost at civil war. Fortunately, it is not explicit war, but it is happening in the kinds of illegal immigration and drug trafficking, which clearly is posing security threats to the United States. So it is our hope that new Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who knows very well the cultures of North America and South America, can devise a robust foreign policy that, in combination with the domestic policy of other branches of government, produce a better understanding of different governments in the Americas, so that Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Bolivia are freed from their dictators. In the case of Venezuela, we need Edmundo González Urrutia to become a president in power. In the case of Bolivia, we need them to participate in fair elections with the participation of opposition candidates. In the case of Nicaragua, we need them to free their political prisoners and allow the opposition to participate in elections, which it hasn't been able to do for a long time. And in Cuba, we need to overthrow the head of the communist regime that has successfully invaded most of Latin America. In Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, Cuban influence is unacceptable, And the populations of those countries are worried that if the United States does not act soon, they all might fall into communist dictatorships again. So United States citizens will not be complaining about the United States being swallowed by communism as it happened during the Kamala Harris campaign, but you will have to worry about the whole continent falling into communism. Therefore, isolationism for Donald Trump must be only for Eurasia, Africa, and Oceania. But Latin America and the Caribbean must be considered together with North America as a single hemisphere with a common domestic and foreign policy, according to 1823 Monroe Doctrine from President Monroe, who asked that the Americas are for the Americans.